Final Haunt by R.J. Spears, read by the author. It was Halloween night, the night of nights. Justin had been afraid he wouldn't be able to pull it off. He'd started almost too late and had no help. But after 15 years of entertaining the town with the best amateur haunted house around, he had no choice. The show had to go on. Uppers and booze had kept him going for the past 72 hours. This would be his best haunt ever. It just had to be. Someone's at the front of the line, and he's only allowing in small groups one at a time, Tony said, looking back at the line stringing down and around the block. Tony and Brittany and Will were nearly at the front of the line, with only 3 groups in front of them. I feel sorry for the poor suckers behind us, Brittany said, wiping a strand of luxuriant blonde hair out of her eyes and then wringing her hands in anticipation. Look, there's Teresa and Sam, Will said, waving at 2 of their Kennedy High School classmates at the front of the line. They must have gotten here really early. Tony, Brittany, and Will were best friends and had been going to Justin Hall's haunt since they were kids. It was the highlight of their year. Those first few times, they nearly peed their pants. It was still scary because Justin poured his heart and soul into it every year. Tony felt the tendrils of fear seeping into his gut, but couldn't admit it because he was a big, strong football player. Will maintained the same stone face, but he felt a little anxious himself. Justin was about to open the doors when he popped another upper, dry swallowing it. It took a few moments before he felt the surge of energy. His head swam a little when it hit. He had just put the final touches on the first 5 rooms only an hour ago, and that heady anticipation he felt every year rushed over him. He'd come so close to shutting it down. His wife, Sandy, wasn't on board this year. She was tired of his obsession, sick of all the time, and more than a little afraid of his angry flare-ups when things didn't go just right. His kids were usually up for it, but Sandy had poisoned them against him, and they refused to help. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't bring them over to his side. This year, he'd have to go it alone because he had no other choice. He pulled on his Grim Reaper costume, complete with a skull mask and sigh. Sure, some of the rooms are rehashes of years gone by, but an encore presentation wasn't a bad thing. It was the last rooms that worried him, because there was almost nothing in them. He knew he'd have to improvise. He went to greet the first visitors, 2 fresh-faced teenagers from the local high school, eager to be the first one into Justin's horrific creation. In a way, they felt lucky to be first, but they'd change their minds about that soon enough. Brittany watched as the Grim Reaper escorted Sam and Teresa inside and felt a serious pang of jealousy that they got to be the first ones in the door. There was nothing to do but wait their turn, she told herself. Still, she kicked herself for taking all that time to fix her hair, making them late. Someone screamed in terror inside the haunted house. Their scream sounded so real. Brittany clutched Tony's arm and practically jitterbugged in the street in anticipation. A true scare junkie, she loved horror movies and anything scary. Visiting this haunted house was the apex of her Halloween week every year. The Grim Reaper glided silently out of the house and escorted a middle-aged couple past the fake wrought iron gate and then inside the haunted house. The wait between groups was longer than in years past, but they knew it would be worth it. It always was. A few minutes later, a chainsaw roared to life and someone inside the haunt screamed in pure terror. Brittany bounced up and down. I can't wait. It's got to be the best. Calm down, woman, Tony said in a mock chiding tone, hugging her tightly. Hey, Brittany said. Will, call Teresa and Sam. See how they liked it. Will shrugged, pulled out his cell phone, and punched in some numbers. Holding the phone to his ear, he waited. After about 30 seconds, he put the phone back in his pocket and said, I didn't answer. We'll be inside soon enough, Tony said, trying to get a look inside at what lay ahead for them. 5 minutes later, the Grim Reaper slid out of the shadows. Small droplets of fake blood dotted his skull mask, some dripping down like tears, putting a thrill into Brittany. Silently, he spread his arm and ushered them inside. Brittany clung to Tony's arm, her eyes wide with fear, yet still eager. The first room was a classic. The mad scientist lab. A strobe light flashed, illuminating a body on a gurney. Blood-stained sheets covered the body, but a mangled hand stuck out ominously. Electronic equipment clicked, whirred, and snapped with a pulsing current. Every detail was perfect, down to the blood-soaked surgical instruments. The next room was a haunted train with skeletons and zombies along for the ride. A vampire floated from the ceiling, dangling on an impossible-to-see wire. Sound effects boomed and thundered from a dizzying array of speakers in the ceiling, screams from the train of the damned. The mummy room was third, complete with tattered mummy wrappings hanging from the ceiling. A large jackal-headed statue of Anubis leaned in toward the trio, giving Will a start, causing him to jump back into Tony and Brittany. They teetered on their feet for a few seconds, but were able to stay upright. An open sarcophagus stood in the corner, but there was no mummy walking around to scare patrons like in years past. Brittany felt a pang of annoyance at this omission. Her sense of disappointment was more than evident in her expression. "There's nobody jumping out at us," she whined in Tony's ear. "I heard he was on his own this year," Tony said. The next room was a great departure from the other rooms. There were no sound effects or music and no flashing lights, but there was a bad odor in the air, something wet and coppery with a tinge of decay. Tony felt his stomach lurch a little, but didn't say anything. It was a simple graveyard setting with 3 tombstones and 3 bodies wrapped in sheets. A blood-covered hand stuck out from under one of the sheets. While it was creepy, it wasn't the all-out scare that Brittany was looking for as she shoved her 2 friends to the next room. It was a real charnel house, complete with blood and dismembered body parts. Open coffins littered the floor with the most realistic corpses Brittany had ever seen. Each one had vicious wounds that looked fresh. A dismembered arm, complete with a bone sticking out of the stump, sat in the center of the room. Tony could swear he saw it twitching. "Oh yeah, baby," Brittany said, her eyes wide in a combination of fear and excitement. Just as they were leaving the room, a bloody hand shot out of the coffin and clutched Brittany around the ankle. She shrieked and yanked her leg away from the still grasping hand. A voice came from the coffin. Help me, please." Brittany pulled away and screamed with utter joy. "Now that's more like it." She got a real letdown when they entered the next room. It was completely empty. A dim light filtered in from the previous room, casting the group's shadow long and thin across the floor. "What the?" Will started, but was cut off when the Grim Reaper stepped out of the shadows, brandishing his sai. Brittany thought maybe there was some potential here if the Grim Reaper did something spectacular. Maybe this room could be saved. The Reaper stood placidly, blocking the trio's advance. "What's up, dude?" Will said, trying to be funny. Before he could say another word, the Reaper put his sai into motion. In a flash, the blade cut through the air with a slight whistle. It struck Will in his neck and sheared off his head effortlessly, like a hot knife through warm butter. Will's head bounced off the floor with a dull thud, sending a spray of blood onto both Tony and Brittany. Tony pinwheeled away from the blood spurting out of Will's neck and slammed into a set of jutting blades on the opposite wall. 2 of the blades ran through Tony's back and out through his stomach. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, blood flowing over his lips. Then he slumped forward, his body limp and lifeless. Blood dripped from his now slack mouth. Brittany stood, eyes wide with shock and terror, blood dripping off her hands and face. The Grim Reaper's blade sliced through the air again. It cut into her, opening her from chest to abdomen, like a fish being gutted. The blade flew again, completing the X pattern across her torso. Her entrails spilled out of her now open abdominal cavity, and she collapsed onto them, her eyes still open, staring into the nothingness. Justin pulled off his mask and surveyed his handiwork, nodding his head in approval. An electric thrill coursed through his body. This was just what he needed after losing his job and having his wife file for divorce, threatening to take the 2 kids. These 3 teenagers would join his family and the other patrons to help him pull off the best haunt ever.